rating every single Pro League Group D team. Let's go. Let's start with Liquid, who finished 5th in this group. They did not make it through to playoffs. They beat Lin Vision, they beat Cloud9, but they lost against Virtus Pro again, and then Eternal Fire, and they go straight into S. Just kidding. What a funny joke that is. No, I'm sorry, it's F for Liquid. You want to know the last time Liquid didn't make it through to a Pro League playoffs? This is Pro League Season 18, remember. The last time they didn't make it through the group stage, through to the playoffs, was Season 1. The first bloody season back in 2015. This is an org that not only should be making it to playoffs, but should be competing for trophies. And that is not happening right now. Now listen, a lot of those other Pro Leagues were back when they were competing against NA teams to make it to the finals. So there is a little bit of a difference there, but still, this team should be making it through. It's weird because basically every player was between about the same rating. They all had about a 1.01 or 2 or 3. Basically all very average ratings. And the concern for me with this team right now, firstly, they can't seem to win their map picks. They lost their map pick against VP. They lost their map pick against Eternal Fire. That is a real worry. It really suggests to me that they're not a team that have a good foundation, a good solid base to build from. I think the first thing when you're a new team you want to have is just those map picks nailed down. Maybe 2 or 3 maps that you can always rely on, that you can always go to. I don't feel like Liquid really have that right now. There's also been no consistency as to who's going to show up on what series or what map. And the frustrating thing with Yakindar as an in-game leader is I don't think he's a great in-game leader. I don't think he's as bad as maybe the community is making out. I think there's some things that look okay with Liquid in terms of their team play and general structure. But I don't think he's a good in-game leader. I think he probably is subpar right now. And it's also limiting his individual ability on a team that don't have the firepower. They just don't have the firepower right now. It's also concerning me that Naf has not been good on this team. He's been putting up average numbers because he's been so good for so long, but he's not an ideas guy. Naf is not the kind of guy that's going to force you to play in a way where he is set up. He wants to be in the late round. He doesn't want to think about that. And so that does suggest to me Naf is not getting set up in the way he should be, because normally his late round style is so consistent if you get him into those positions. I think Rainwaker maybe looked a little better, but I'm still not convinced raw skill-wise he's a tier 1 player. I just don't think he is. And I know I've been going on about this headshot percentage thing a little bit, but here's the context. Rainwaker, at this group stage of Pro League, had the same headshot percentage as m0NESY. m0NESY's an AWPer, man. How is that like, there are other riflers that have similarly low headshot percentages. Naf is one of them because he cleans up in the late round. But it's still just an example of how when I'm watching Rainwaker, I just never feel like he's going to win those fights that he needs to win. He'll either just disappoint. He'll never win a fight that he shouldn't. I don't know, man. There's something that's off with his team. And remember, they've got to play at the EU RMR. I mean, the only thing I will say, losses against VP aren't the end of the world, and the loss against Eternal Fire was 2 matches in a day. So that is sometimes difficult to deal with. I think that's not a great format. So maybe I'm being a little harsh by putting them in F, but at the same time, Liquid's expectation should be to make it through. You know what, let's move swiftly on, because I'm sure if you're a Liquid fan, you want to get over the heartbreak, the sadness of not being in playoffs. Let's move on to VP. A little happier story for these guys. They finished 3rd in their group. They beat Liquid, Eternal Fire, Liquid again, and they took that 1 loss against G2. And so for me, VP have to be an A. This is a good showing from these guys, considering they have had that roster move recently. They haven't been always playing tournaments consistently. This was a good test of where they're at, and they passed. I think James, farming numbers, good to see, because heading into this event, his rating was a little lower than normal. I think the Rifles are doing enough, right? Including Norbert, who's doing okay in those bad roles. Interestingly, like, their T side is still showing that you kind of don't need to frag loads all the time. They're such an efficient team at winning rounds. Because in this group, they had the lowest amount of multi-kill rounds overall. They had the lowest amount on average of rounds where their players on the T side would get a multi-kill, a double kill, or a triple kill. But they have the 4th highest win percentage on T side. So very efficient. James' calling style was still great. I think VP are just in the spot you expect them to be, but they had to prove it at this event, and they've done exactly that. That's why they get an A, because there was a little uncertainty around this team. They showed us that they are still that solid dark horse we know they're capable of being. Next, we're going to have G2. They topped the group. They beat Lin Vision. They beat VP. They beat Complexity. Albeit that Complexity one got a little shaky, where they nearly lost on that second map. But listen, you top your group in Pro League, it's got to be an S for me. I mean, did they do what was expected? Yes. But at the same time, there were a lot of good signs for them. And realistically, once teams have qualified, they do take their foot off the gas a little bit. So I'm not going to take too much away from that close Complexity series. I'm instead going to focus on the good things. m0NESY was great. I think Nico had a slow start to the tournament, but really picked it up as it went on. And yet again, I think Hunter is the most important player to show up. Because when Hunter shows up, G2 win. Simple as. He's in a lot of important roles for the team. He's clearly a secondary voice on the team as well. You can see it with his in-game intelligence. And I saw a lot of rounds where, again, he's getting into good positions, or it looks like he's made the call for the team. I think that's so important, especially because it seems like Hooksy is taking more of a backseat in general and letting the players do what they want and trying to accommodate them. So having another voice in there is huge for them. And Hunter actually had the highest ADR on the team, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, he was definitely up there. So that's a great sign. Even if m0NESY and Nico are getting higher rating than him, shows those important positions that Hunter plays. They actually had one of the highest T-side win percentages at the tournament, and they won 88% of their man advantage rounds on T-side. So a really clean group stage here from G2. The only thing I will say is Hooksy did better than expected in terms of his individual level. Listen, that's not going to happen consistently. I refuse to believe it. If it does, it's actually a great sign, because all I want is for Hooksy to up his level to just being a normal in-game leader's level as an individual fragger, and suddenly this team feels unstoppable. But I'll believe that when I see it. For now, G2 get the S tier for group stage, but we all know for G2, the real test is in playoffs. They're a team that should be competing for trophies. They did the job, and they did it pretty damn convincingly here. Next, we have Lin Vision. They finished 6th to 7th in the group. They beat 9 in a really close series, but they lost against G2 and Liquid twice. Listen, I am going to give them a B tier, which may seem a little high, but all their losses were actually quite close. Even one of their maps against G2 was quite close. And they looked more comfortable than I expected. I think it's the standard expected result for Lin Vision to have maybe some games where they bring it close, but when it gets down to crunch time, they struggle a bit. And to be fair, against 9, they actually looked very comfortable and calm in those late round scenarios. G was winning some nice clutches late round with the AWP. He had 5 clutches at the tournament, which was pretty high compared to everyone else at this group stage. I do think G was mostly good against 9 though, and sometimes that AWP stepping up can be difficult against the top teams. We did see that here. Starry does look like a real talent though, and overall, their style of CS looked decent. There was no clear weak point in terms of players. There was no clear weakness in their style of play. It all looked pretty well rounded, and so for a team who has been playing in their region and has only got the chance now to come to Europe, yeah, Lin Vision, this is a solid result for them. I think they get a B, even though they finished pretty low down in the group. The actual eye test showed me they're a decent team. They were bringing games close, and with a bit more experience, they could maybe get some upsets. Next, we have Cloud9, who also finished 6th to 7th. They beat Eternal Fire, but they lost against Complexity, Liquid, and then in a rematch against Eternal Fire. Now, normally I give out 1 S tier and 1 F tier, but this tournament, these two teams were so bad that they both deserve an F. I'm sorry, Cloud9. This is an F. And I know you're a newish lineup, but you have to be just on your individual skill making it through this group. And their T-sides sucked. Their T-sides were garbage, straight garbage. They had the lowest T-side win percentage in the group, the 4th lowest in the whole event. And remember, that includes teams like Rooster, teams who are basically like non-factors at this tournament that qualify because they get a regional qualifier and they're not expected to do anything. Sometimes those teams are genuinely semi-professional. And yet Cloud9's T side was down there with those bottom teams. That is a really bad sign. And that's also despite their utility damage and flash assist numbers actually being good, and Shiro and Electronic being top 5 in this group for clutches won. So they were winning clutches, but they weren't winning the rounds they're meant to win, which is wild. Listen, there are some good points, obviously. Shiro still cleans up CT side. That is a staple. That is always going to happen. His AWPing style and his consistency is very good for that. Axile actually had good numbers on T side as well, which in theory is a piece you can build around. But the calling looked pretty bad. The cohesion didn't look great. And moreover, Hobbit was especially bad. He was the lowest rated player in this group. I don't know what happened, but he does not look comfortable at all on this team right now. I'm even seeing like weird lapses in concentration, it feels like, where it almost feels like he just forgets he's playing Counter-Strike for a second and then loses a fight. I don't know, man. This is a real scary look for Cloud9, and I know it's early, but if something doesn't change in the future, you have to consider Hobbit out, an IGL in, maybe even a coach change. I'm still willing to give them a bit of time because it's a newish roster and the firepower on paper looks really good if they can get the pieces together. But I don't see how the pieces are going to come together right now with the performances I'm seeing from this team. Let's hope that does change. Maybe we'll see in the future, but for now, it's an F for this event. Cloud9 not making playoffs, unacceptable, if we're being honest. Let's move on to Eternal Fire. Let's get back on the positive mindset. They finished 4th in the group. They made it to playoffs. They beat 9, Cloud9, and Liquid, and then took losses against Cloud9 and VP as well. I think they've got to get an A here. I mean, this is a great result for Eternal Fire. They were a team who are, up and down coming into this event. We weren't sure what to expect, but they had some really positive signs here. Xantares had a slow start, but he really clicked into gear as the tournament went on, and he still looks like a ridiculously good rifler. Too good, probably, to be on a full Turkish team, but that's what he's decided to do, and you know what? Now with this project, I don't mind it. As long as they stick with this 5, which they never seem to be able to do. It's like a bloody reality TV show over there where every month a new player seems to get voted off and a new one voted in for whatever reason. But as long as they have solved those internal issues, this Eternal Fire team looks like they could actually be quite good. Wakadia from the Academy looks so good so early on. He looked very comfortable at this stage. That is a very promising sign for this team because they've needed that 5th, that new blood for a while. Maja's always going to be a bad fragger as the in-game leader, but I think his prep work is actually really good. I think he goes for sometimes an execute-heavy style, but they're happy to play in the late round a lot. I think they do some creative things with their utility, which works really well. And I think you could see that they were prep-heavy because they were able to win in some of those rematch games, right? When they were able to play against Cloud9 the second time, they clearly learned and adjusted from that. I'm maybe a little scared that there's a chance they can get anti-stratted. I think in the future, if they continue with the execute-heavy style, if they continue with the similar plays, once teams look into them, maybe they could be a bit readable, and maybe they were a bit taken for granted here. But at the same time, making it through is already impressive. I'm excited to see what these guys can do in playoffs, and I love seeing a regional team do well in a increasingly international world of Counter-Strike that we live in. To move on to Complexity. Finally, NA fans can have a little bit of happiness, a little bit of hope in their lives. Complexity. Listen, I said before, I normally give 1 S and 1 F. Complexity are getting the second S of this video. They deserve it. Coming out of the group in 2nd place, beating 9, Cloud9, and then losing against G2. The only thing I will say is, now that we've come to the end of the group, mad enough, 9 were maybe the worst team here. I mean, they finished last. And Cloud9 actually struggled as well. So, weirdly, Complexity, you could argue, got an easier run through the group than they should have. But they still nearly beat G2. They deserve props for the way they played. I almost get similar vibes to Eternal Fire, who I just talked about, but just better across the board from Complexity. Floppy was great here. I think he's always been a good trade fragger. I really like that about him. He's so reliable at getting trades when he's playing well. Alish wasn't even that good here, weirdly enough. You'd expect him to be the main man, but the core played well. Alish, I will say, was their highest rated player on CT side, so he was locking it down for them in those rounds. I think I'm a little confused about Holzerk as a player, because he's one of those AWPers that, at least at this event, for example, he didn't put up massive CT numbers. He was actually similarly rated on both sides. And normally I do want my AWPer to be doing a lot on CT side and really setting up those round wins for me. But at the same time, Complexity, really solid here. I hope that they can keep it up. I think JT, for me, has been underrated as a caller for a little bit now. I still think that because he hasn't had the results in the past, he's gone a little under the radar, because this Complexity team, like, I still think their players are good, but maybe not good enough to be doing something like this. So I'm happy for these guys. I think JT has adapted well. Let's see what they can do going forward. We got one more team. It is 9. They finished last. They lost against Complexity, Eternal Fire, and Lin Vision. I'm not quite putting them in F, though. I am putting them in C, which might feel a little too nice to them, to some of you guys watching, because honestly, coming into this group, I expected them to be competing, or at least getting a few wins on the board. But at the same time, every single one of their losses was really close here. Now, listen, that is not really excusable against Lin Vision. But actually, Complexity and Eternal Fire both made it through. So maybe in hindsight, those losses aren't as bad as you initially think. And there were at least positive signs. For example, K or Key has normally been pretty quiet on LAN, and he is often their best player online. And he actually had a good event here, which I think is a great sign for this squad going forwards. Everyone else, I think, mostly played to their level. The one thing that was missing was Hades just had a bad tournament. He was just having a bad tournament. He needed to be one of the best players, if not the best player on this team alongside Kai. He just wasn't that. He was just missing shots. And in so many of those tight games, I think if Hades played just a little better, they get them over the line. It is a little frustrating. 9 just constantly feel like that team that are fun to watch, innovative. They're nearly there, but they're not quite there because their firepower always holds them back just that little bit. But the reason I give them that C is because of that promising sign with K playing well, and because I don't think Hades will have an event as bad as this again. This is one he can just take as a write-off. I think he will do better going forwards, and if the rest of the players play as well as they did here, suddenly those close losses turn into close wins, and 9 become that upset team we know they're capable of. Let me know what you guys think about my grades for every team here. Let's get ready for playoffs. I hope it's going to be good because the CSGO end might be coming. CS2 around the corner. Let's wait and see. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you next time.